dear distinguished guests and esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is both an honor and a great pleasure to welcome you to the opening session of the first round International Colloquium on the protection of cultural property in crisis and conflict. Today marks the inaugural session of the first round International Colloquium, an interdisciplinary initiative dedicated to confronting some of the most pressing challenges in cultural heritage preservation. On behalf of the European Academy of Science and Arts, the Hellenic Blue Seal Committee, the Hungarian National Commission for UNESCO, and the Heritage Science at the University of Ljubljana, I extend my warmest greetings to each of you joining us today from around the globe. In an era where cultural heritage faces unprecedented threats, from armed conflict and climate disasters to illicit trafficking and ethical disputes, this series serves as a vital platform for dialogue, innovation, cooperation across disciplines. The opening dialogue sets the tone for a series of conversations that will explore how emerging technologies, ethical frameworks, and international cooperation can better protect tangible and intangible heritage in times of war, disaster, and illicit exploitation. This colloquium represents a sustained commitment to bridging science and the humanities. Over the coming months, we will address themes ranging from digital reproduction and 3D restoration ethics to anti-looting strategies and the role of AI in heritage conservation, all with the shared aim of developing actionable, forward-looking strategies to safeguard our global cultural legacy. Today, we begin with a deeply symbolic and timely topic, the Parthenon marbles, a case that embodies the complex interplay of history, law, ethics, diplomacy, and identity. A case that powerfully illustrates these intersecting domains in the fight for cultural restitution. Our distinguished speakers will guide us through the latest developments and perspectives, setting the stage for the crucial conversations that will follow in the months ahead. Thank you for your commitment to preserving our shared cultural legacy. Without further ado, let us proceed with today's program. I would like to welcome the President of the European Academy of Science and Arts, Professor Klaus Mainzer, President and Emeritus of Excellence at the Technological University of München, to give a greeting to our colloquium. Klaus, please.
Yes, thank you, Ioannis. As president of this academy, it is, of course, my pleasure to bring you the greetings on behalf of the whole academy on this remarkable event, the Parthenon marbles dispute for and against their return. Thanks at first to you, Ioannis, as organizer for this great initiative. Athens, with the birth of science and democracy, that is actually the myth of Europe's founding idea. Nations and continents, you know, have idealized stories and narratives of their origin. Remember, for example, China with its idealized story of the antique empire, or the United States. They only have copies of Greek and Roman temples for their official buildings in Washington. But historically, the story is, of course, idealized. Actually, you know, in Athens' antique democracy, women and migrants had no voice, and they had slaves. That is remarkable because in the next week we will have the Women's Day in our academy. Thus, by the way, the great Pericles, the great Greek politician, had problems with the civil rights of his wife because she was not from Athens, and his son. Anyway, in the beginning of modern times, in Renaissance, Europe glorified the origin of science and philosophy in the famous fresco of Raphael's The School of Athens. And yes, it is true. The origin of modern science and industrialization has been in Europe, but successful innovation on the markets, especially with the leading technology, AI, that's my field, is mainly in the US and in China. Europe is in danger to become a museum. Consider, for example, this week, a remarkable event, the merge of this successful AI company XAI with the space company SpaceX. Now, these AI companies need a lot of money today. And on the other hand, the space company SpaceX earns the money. So it is, of course, it makes sense to merge these both companies in order to enable a spectacular IPO. On the other hand, and here you can see how nowadays technology, science, research is involved with capital. In fact, it needs enormous opportunity in the space conditions to realize supercomputing. Now, therefore, Europe's technical, economic, political, and military sovereignty and competitiveness is in danger. But where the danger is, also grows the saving power. Do you know this quotation? It's a famous European poet from the 18th century, Friedrich Hölderlin, and he liked the Greek poems. But where the danger is, also grows the saving power. Yesterday, here in Munich at the TUM, my university, together with leading companies, Siemens Telecom and NVIDIA, they founded one of Europe's biggest AI factory here in Munich with 10,000 graphic processors. And some weeks ago in Jülich, the fourth fastest supercomputer in the world, the first three are US, was introduced, 24,000 graphic processors. By the way, at that occasion, I can invite you for the 17th March, because then we will have one with the European Academy of Sciences and EU representatives, a workshop, an international workshop on the future of supercomputing in Europe. But don't forget France. France with Mistral, one of the best AI startups in the world, and Italy and Poland with their Q quantum initiative. Now there is hope. But what about the other side of our founding myth in Greece? What about democracy? What about human rights? Is democracy on its way out? And that is already discussed by political scientists, because it is no longer efficient and able to handle the increasing complexity of our civilization and the natural challenges of this planet. What about law? Are the lawyers only running after the accelerated technological development? Is, in the end, technocracy with big companies the alternative? I personally believe in our academy we have to defend also our European values, not only technology. And I think these are actually exciting questions for your colloquium. And the future of our European Academy on the historical background of the Parthenon. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Thank you. May I call Matthias Stirlitz from the Heritage Science Laboratory, University of Ljubljana, and Professor of Heritage Science Institute for Sustainable Heritage at the University of College London. Dear Matthias.
Thank you so much, Professor Liritzis. It has been an incredible pleasure to have been working on you to pull together the program for this series. And it's a big pleasure for me to attend this inaugural session. I will not be long at all because a lot has been said, and we are all looking forward to an exciting lecture tonight, except to say and underline perhaps how important not just caring for cultural heritage, but also how important it is for us to recognize, value, as well as understand and communicate cultural heritage. And I think these colloquia contribute to these activities incredibly. They also underline the value of cultural heritage to our societies, to our communities, and to individuals. And I think that's an important role for such colloquia as well. And I think in doing this, we need to constantly underline and support our governments and support a cross-sectoral dialogue within our governments, such that they realize that cultural heritage is not just a matter for ministries of culture or ministries of antiquity or whatever, but that cultural heritage is a matter for entire governments and for cross-sectoral dialogue. Only through this will we achieve that cultural heritage is protected through all governmental activities and through proper governmental and budget planning. I couldn't underline this more because there are only a few countries, such as, for example, France and Italy, where a dialogue between ministries of culture and science has been established. But there are other sectors that we must address, for example, agriculture, digital transition, etc., etc. So there's a long road ahead. We're very lucky that the European Commission has been listening to our repeated calls for funding into research for cultural heritage, i.e. in the field of heritage science. For those of you who don't know the term, heritage science is basically an umbrella term that brings together fields of expertise contributing to understanding, recognition, and communication of cultural heritage. So it's basically an umbrella term that spans across arts and humanities as well as STEM disciplines. With this, I will conclude and I will hand over to Professor Liritzis and, of course, to our speakers. And just to underline again how happy I am for our Heritage Science Laboratory to be included. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you very much for your support. The next supporter of our colloquia is Dr. Gabor Sos, General Secretary, Hungarian National Commission of UNESCO and Advisory Committee member of International Center for Creativity and Sustainable Development under the auspices of UNESCO, Beijing, China. Please, Gabor.
Thank you very much, Professor Ioannis. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, dear friends. I am tempted to respond to the speakers before me, but I'll stick to my original talk, and I hope we can meet next time to discuss the very interesting topics that you raised. It's indeed a great pleasure and honor to welcome you to launch this expert colloquium jointly initiated by the European Academy of Sciences and Arts in collaboration with the Hellenic Blue Shield Committee, with our endorsement as the Hungarian National Commission for UNESCO and the academic partnership of the Center of Excellence Green Heritage Science at the University of Ljubljana. We are gathered here today at a particular moment in time, but also at a particular crossing of times. We speak about cultural heritage while wars are being fought, while cities are being destroyed, while objects, monuments, practices, and memories are displaced, sometimes violently, sometimes silently. In such moments, heritage appears fragile, and yet it is precisely then that its meaning becomes most visible. Cultural heritage is never only about the past. It is about how the past reaches the present and what kind of future we allow it to shape. 2 centuries ago, John Keats who never saw the Parthenon itself, but encountered Greek antiquity through fragments brought to London, namely the Elgin marbles, confer his sonnet upon visiting the Elgin marbles in 1970. So in another poet, he described a Grecian urn as a silent form that teases us out of thought, as doth eternity itself. He understood something that still challenges us today, that material heritage speaks across time, not by answering our questions, but by demanding better ones. The Parthenon marbles, which frame today's discussion, confront us with the same temporal tension. They are ancient, yet profoundly contemporary, rooted in a specific place, yet claimed by multiple narratives. They are matter, stone, weight, and surface, and at the same time carriers of law, memory, and ethical responsibility. They remain, as John Keats wrote, in the midst of other woe than ours, enduring beyond individual generations. And precisely because they endure, they ask something of us. This is why questions of return, restitution, or preservation cannot be reduced to technical solutions alone. They demand something more demanding, temporal responsibility. We live in an age where technology offers unprecedented possibilities. We can scan, replicate, store, simulate, and even generate heritage artificially, digitally. These tools are powerful, but they are not neutral. They shape how we see, what we value, and what we consider replaceable. A digital copy can preserve information, but it cannot replace responsibility, and it cannot carry memory of its own. Heritage always exists somewhere, and when heritage is attacked by war, looted in crisis, or abstracted into mere data, what is ultimately at stake is not ownership alone, but the continuity of meaning. This is why this colloquium matters. This series is not conceived as an exercise only in moral panic, nor as a purely descriptive inventory of losses, technologies, or legal positions. It does not subscribe to a technological naivete, nor to a nostalgic refusal for change. Its task is more demanding. It is to create a space for responsible speech, where knowledge is articulated in awareness of its consequences, where expertise is exercised without domination, and where disagreement, if there is treated not as a threat, but as a civic resource. In this sense, this colloquium does not merely discuss cultural heritage in crisis. It participates in shaping the conditions under which future decisions will be made, ethically, legally, and politically, in the EU and other arenas. In times when silence can be complicity and speed can be violence, how we speak about heritage already shapes its fate. From a UNESCO perspective, let me conclude this with, this resonates deeply with a foundational insight in 1945, that peace, not only built by treaties, but by the way societies relate to knowledge, memory, and to one another. Heritage, especially in times of conflict, is not a luxury. It is the condition for recovery and for trust. And to conclude with Keats, he ended his poem with a line often quoted, sometimes too easily. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. Today, we might hear it less as an answer and more as a responsibility, a reminder that truth without care becomes damage, and beauty without truth becomes illusion. Let us therefore approach today's discussions not as defenders of fixed positions, but as custodians of a shared responsibility, aware that what we decide, preserve, digitize, return, or neglect today will shape how future generations understand both the past and themselves. I wish this colloquium openness, intellectual courage, tolma, and ethical clarity. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Gabor. Thank you very much for so warm words. Last, I would like to ask Elena, Dr. Korka. Elena, are you here?
Yes, she is coming.
Is she here?
Yes, Elena is coming.
Is coming?
Yes. No, it's here. It's here.
Is here. An archaeologist and heads the Greek Committee for the Protection of Cultural Heritage, Honorary Director General of Antiquities and Cultural Heritage, and the President of Hellenic Committee for the Blue Seal to greet our colloquium.
I want to express my warmest congratulations to the European Academy of Sciences and Arts. This is a great moment because we appear to the public which is listening to us and which will profit from this very organization of topics that are the most timely in our days. We start with the major issue of the return of the Parthenon marbles. What else? It is the issue and shall be until it is resolved. And this colloquium leads to that, I'm sure, through the various very important opinions that shall be heard. So I shall also address my very warm congratulations to the other endorsers of this sequence of presentations which shall follow. On our part, as the Hellenic Committee of the Blue Shield, I feel that ending up with the issue of crisis, threats, the confrontation of disasters is the best way that we shall finish our series. And the chair of the International Committee of the Blue Shield shall speak to us about the most recent events and how they are confronted by the International Blue Shield. I think that we really are living a great moment as we all join our forces in this new endeavor. Congratulations and best wishes to all.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you. Now I have the pleasure of offering the moderator chair to Professor Beris, distinguished and emeritus professor of hematology in Geneva Medical School, to invite the speakers and to manage the discussion. Dear Fotis.
Thank you, Professor Liritzis, and thank all of our supporters for their interesting and kind introduction. Today's round concerns the Parthenon marbles dispute, arguments for and against the return, and the latest development. We have the chance to have with us three speakers, international experts of the subjects. We will have first the three lectures, approximately 25 minutes each, and at the end, you will have 45 to 60 minutes time for questions. Please use chat to send your questions in writing and mention the speaker to whom the question is addressed. The first speaker is Bruce Clark. Okay, the first is Bruce Clark. Clark is an author, broadcaster, and veteran journalist who has worked as international security editor of The Economist and diplomatic correspondent for the Financial Times. He has worked as a foreign correspondent in Paris, Athens, Moscow, and Washington, District of Columbia. He is the author of Athens, City of Wisdom, a history of the metropolis from ancient to modern times, and of Twice a Stranger, a prize-winning study of the Greek-Turkish population exchange. He is presenter and co-producer of the film From Cambridge with Love, a call to mend the Parthenon's broken treasures. Bruce Clark will speak about UK, more shock than awe, how Elgin's compatriots viewed his actions. Dear Bruce, you may start your conference.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be taking part in this very important discussion. I'm waiting for some pictures to appear. Very good. It's a great honor to be speaking alongside so many distinguished people and so many people who bring to this subject great passion. Let's begin by reminding ourselves that something quite extraordinary began to happen on the Acropolis on July the 31st, 1801. And it would have seemed extraordinary even to those who were following very closely the contest between Britain and France to dominate the Eastern Mediterranean and to acquire the ancient treasures of the East Mediterranean. And indeed, it would have seemed extraordinary, in their own peculiar terms, an extraordinary success, even to those British people who were most intensively engaged in those efforts. What occurred at the end of July 1801 would have seemed absolutely impossible at the beginning of that month. Let us remind ourselves of the British individuals who were most closely involved in promoting their own country's interest as they saw it, as well as certain private interests. First and foremost, of course, Thomas Bruce, Earl of Elgin, a member of an ancient Scottish family, already at the age of 33, when he was appointed as ambassador in Constantinople, an experienced diplomat, somebody who had every expectation of making a brilliant success of his embassy in that city, given that Anglo-Ottoman relations had suddenly become very warm and were becoming warmer. And his much younger wife, Mary, who was only 20 when she married Lord Elgin in March 1799, and then only a few months later went to the embassy and became, so to speak, the diplomatic spouse of all diplomatic spouses, taking the city by storm in some ways, using her energy and her intelligence, rather undirected intelligence, you might say, but nonetheless, she was a bright and energetic lady to penetrate parts of the Ottoman court, which had been completely inaccessible to Westerners before. And then another young person, a young and talented and ambitious person, a clergyman and a scholar called the Reverend Philip Hunt, who was from a modest background and got a wonderful opportunity when, shortly after taking his MA from Cambridge, he was appointed by Elgin to be chaplain and assistant. As Hunt himself wrote to his father, this is not only going to make me famous, it's also going to make me a great deal of money. There's no doubting Hunt's intelligence. There's no doubting Hunt's competence as a classical scholar, but he was also a person of intense personal ambition, as events will soon show. Now, as of, let's go to the spring of 1801, when in this British camp, the camp formed by the Elgins and Philip Hunt and their various assistants, there is a mood of impatience. Since 1800, a team of artists have been working on the Acropolis. They have an ambivalent mandate to draw and to mold and to possibly take away antiquity.
Here, hello?
Γιάννη, φαίνεται ότι χάθηκε η σύνδεση. Μήπως για να μην έχουμε το κενό, να συνεχίσω εγώ και μετά όταν επανασυνδεθούν.
Κατάλαβα. Να ρωτήσουμε το Φώτη. Φώτης, can you tell us please what happens?
Μα του Φώτη σύνδεση είχα χαθεί.
Γιατί πολλά. Hello? Hello, can you hear us, Fotis?
Yes, now we can hear you. We had a problem with the connection with Zoom, but now the problem is resolved. Please
Okay, thank
continue.
you.
Good. So I'll resume now. I was talking about the mood, so to speak, in the British camp as of spring, early summer 1801, when there was a sense of impatience that the British employed team of artists on the Acropolis needed to get easier access to the Acropolis, which was, of course, a military garrison. It was administered by a military governor. And they wanted unimpeded access to the Acropolis for the British team, and they didn't want to have to pay so many bribes, to put it frankly. And the only way to get that was a document which they rather loosely described as a firman. Now, a firman, technically speaking, is a document signed, decreed by an Islamic sovereign. In other words, only from the Sultan. But the likes of Philip Hunt and his friends and Mary Elgin used it rather more loosely to refer to any sort of permit signed by an Ottoman bigwig. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. Now, there was one document was circulating in spring 1801. It wasn't good enough. As of July 1801, Hunt was lobbying for a better document, one that would give the team really unfettered access to the Acropolis, and it seemed as though he had succeeded. In fact, in the gushing words of Mary Elgin, who obviously saw the thing as a kind of game, she said in a letter to her parents, "Hunt is in raptures, for the firman is perfection. It allows all our artists to go into the citadel, to copy and model everything in it, to erect scaffolds all around the temple, to dig and discover the ancient foundations, and to bring away any marbles that might be deemed curious by their having inscriptions on them." Now, what evidence do we have about that document? Well, the only concrete evidence of its existence is an Italian version, a somewhat incoherent Italian version that was produced by Philip Hunt quite a few years later. Now, it's not, strictly speaking, a firman, but it does seem to be roughly in the spirit of the document mentioned by Mary Elgin in her letter. In other words, the emphasis was on digging in the ground, taking away some pieces of stone from the ground, and in particular, taking away inscriptions. Well, you might ask, is it possible to improve on perfection? Well, it seems that it is, because that, from Philip Hunt's point of view, is exactly what happened in the course of July 1801. Now, here is a watercolor apparently executed on the very day when Hunt's operation started on the Acropolis. What they began doing was not digging in the ground. It was not looking for inscriptions. It was a systematic effort to strip the Parthenon of all its available high-standing sculptures. And that would have seemed really astonishing to anybody who is observing matters on the Acropolis or in Ottoman Athens generally. It was a big break from what anybody expected 2 or 3 weeks earlier. And what brought about that break was an exceptionally sweet moment in Anglo-Turkish relations when the British had won a stunning victory in Egypt, and also there was talk of a French invasion of Ottoman Greece. And in these circumstances, really, it was felt that the Ottomans could refuse the British nothing. And taking advantage of that very short-lived moment, Philip Hunt decided that he would, in his own words, he would stretch the meaning of the famine, and instead of gathering a few stones from the ground, he would begin a campaign of systematic despoliation. Let us look at the terms in which Philip Hunt itself described what he was doing to his boss, Lord Elgin. First of all, it's telling that the first point he makes in a triumphant letter to his boss, he said, "We have stuck it to the French. The French wanted this, and we got it first." That's above all, this is an object of Anglo-French competition. These objects have been repeatedly refused to the gold and influence of France in the zenith of her power. I have now embarked with other precious fragments. That was after the first two metopes were sent away. And of course, and you, Lord Elgin, will become famous and respected as a result. They will reach England in safety, where they must prove of inestimable service in improving the national taste. Now, Hunt himself, many years later, openly stated that he was stretching the meaning of the document by using it as a license to take away everything in sight, and particularly to take away all the high-standing sculptures. It was the desire to gratify what he considered to be the favorable wishes of the Turkish government toward Elgin, which induced the voivode, the Ottoman governor, to extend rather than contract the precise permissions of the firman. So this was mission creep. This was an extraordinary thing in relation to the expectations that any observer of Ottoman Athens at that time would have had. And there are a couple of well-known eyewitness testimonies which reflect that astonishment. One of them comes from the Anglo-Irish painter born in Sligo in Ireland, who left us, along with his collaborator, Simone Pomardi, some really astonishing and beautiful images of late Ottoman Greece and Athens, and his description of what he perceived is a very vivid one. Nor have I any hesitation in declaring that the Athenians in general, nay, even the Turks themselves, did lament the ruin that was committed and loudly and openly blamed their sovereign for the permission that was granted. I was on the spot at the time, and I had an opportunity of observing and even of participating in the sentiment of indignation which such conduct universally inspired. The whole proceeding was so unpopular in Athens that it was necessary to pay the laborers more than their usual profits before any could be prevailed upon to assist in this work of profanation. Another, perhaps even more famous eyewitness statement comes from another Edward, this time a certain Reverend Edward Daniel Clark. He was a Cambridge clergyman, really by instinct a geologist and a travel writer, and he left a very vivid description of how it would have felt to watch the first metopes coming down. When the last of the metopes was taken from the Parthenon, and a great part of the superstructure with one of the triglyphs was thrown down by the workmen whom Lord Elgin employed, the distar, that's the governor of the Acropolis, who beheld the mischief done to the building, took his pipe from his mouth, dropped a tear, and in a supplicating tone of voice said to Luzieri, the Italian artist, "Tell us," the end. I was present. Now, I'd be the first to agree that, vivid as they are, these two eyewitness accounts are tainted by the fact that both these Edwards were in fact collectors and antiquarians themselves. They were both people who were in the business of removing artifacts from ancient Greece and bringing them to England. So perhaps it might be argued some of the venom against Elgin and his team was motivated by jealousy. Perhaps so. It doesn't invalidate their point, but jealousy may have played a part. And that's why among the immediate eyewitness accounts, I prefer a more innocent one, if you like, which was offered by a young budding politician, Frederick Sylvester North Douglas. He was a grandson of Lord North, the Prime Minister who lost America. And he arrived in Athens on his grand tour at a time when the stripping of the Acropolis had basically been done, but nonetheless, many of the sculptures had still to be shipped. So the events were still very fresh. And he wrote a lovely book, a very sensitive book, entitled An Essay on the Certain Points of Resemblance between the Ancient and Modern Greeks. And he had a very shrewd sense of what was going on politically when the systematic stripping began. He describes it perfectly. At a time when Lord Elgin was our ambassador, our Egyptian victories had raised the English interest of that court to an unexampled height, and the whole of that influence was publicly and privately exerted for the permission to carry off the Athenian marbles. Now, what Douglas also does is he really lays into the argument that if we hadn't got them, the French would have got them. So it's okay for us to do it because we're just beating the French at their own game, and that surely comes above every other consideration. On the contrary, rather elegantly, Douglas writes, it would be thought a strange defense in a pickpocket that he only stole a pocket handkerchief because he knew his friend Bill Soames was waiting to take it if he did not. In other words, frankly, the argument about beating the French isn't a good one morally. What a shame that Frederick Douglass died so young. He entered Parliament at 21 and died at 28. A short and brilliant parliamentary career. We wish it had been longer. Now, Frederick Douglass came hard on the heels of another northern visitor to Ottoman Athens, and perhaps that other visitor is the most famous one of all, namely Lord Byron, another very young man arriving in Athens at Christmas 1809 with all the passion and zest and clarity of thought of a young man, in some ways a troubled young man, a disorderly young man, but a young man who saw certain things with absolute clarity where others didn't. And what he saw above all was what many of his compatriots didn't, which was that the genius reflected in the cultural artifacts of Golden Age Athens had come about, in a certain physical landscape. It had come about amidst the beauty, the rivers, the mountains, the vistas of Attica, not just Athens, but Attica, and it could not usefully be extracted from Attica, from that place, and brought to much colder climates without losing something massive. One of my favorite quotes from Byron is, "I detest antiquarian twaddle, let's have a swim." He utterly despised the mentality which suggested you could just grab a piece of sculpture from the sunshine of Athens, bring it to the cold northern climes, and sprinkle the north somehow with Athenian stardust. He was, for him, ancient Greek civilization was a single phenomenon, a landscape, an impulse, a moment in civilization, and a place, and these things could not be separated. And filled with that passion, and indeed informed by a letter from Edward Daniel Clarke, that was one of the influences on him, Byron proceeded to pen some of the most savage satire, poetic satire that's ever been written in the English language. And he aimed it directly at Lord Elgin. Now, as a literary device, and maybe because of his own unhappy childhood in Aberdeen, he put a special emphasis on the fact that Lord Elgin came from the freezing northern extremes of Great Britain, the land of the Picts and the Scots. And he suggested that Elgin's depredations had been even worse than what was done in the year 396 by Alaric and his army of Goths. In other words, bad things happened in 396 when Alaric rampaged through Athens. They rampaged through the Parthenon. But what this latter-day Pict had done, this latter-day barbarian, was, in Elgin's view, even worse. This was part of a long narrative poem which made Byron, after its publication in 1812, one of the most famous personalities in Europe. Literally, within weeks of publishing it, he became a superstar. So there's an irony here. Philip Hunt had told Elgin that you will be famous and you will be highly respected because of this operation we're carrying out. In fact, to some extent, Elgin became famous or infamous because he was the object of such a brilliant satire. Now, in a second poem, Byron directed his pen towards Elgin so savagely that initially he didn't even propose to publish the poem. He thought it was just too hot stuff to publish openly, and he just circulated among friends. It did, of course, get out in time. This is a poem called The Curse of Minerva, and he plays with the idea that two Greek goddesses who don't normally get along very well were going to gang up and take a terrible revenge on Elgin. Not just Athena, whose citadel has been desecrated by Elgin and his team, but also the goddess of love, Aphrodite or Venus. And those two rival goddesses are going to join forces and take an awful retribution against Elgin. And this was a very sly reference, first of all, to the fact that Elgin was by this stage the most famous cuckold in Great Britain. He had fought a very, very messy divorce case against to separate from Mary Elgin, naming a certain Robert Ferguson as the co-respondent, this was a scandalous case, and it left him in ruins as well. And furthermore, there was a suggestion that the disfigurement of Elgin's face, the fact that he'd lost his nose, might reflect some sexual sins of his own from his youth. So all in all, Venus, Aphrodite, had taken a terrible revenge on Elgin, and Byron drove home that point with absolute cruelty. And he also had an extraordinary prescient sense that the arrogance of Elgin was going to rebound not just against him personally, but against the whole British Empire. And he foresaw the uprising of the Indians in 1857 with extraordinary and uncanny prescience. So one of the most powerful bits of satire ever written in the English language. And of course, he was perfectly accurate in implying that Elgin had suffered terribly as a result of acquiring the marbles. Initially, Mary Nisbet was his great asset, and her money was going to pay the Ottomans, pay all the necessary bribes to acquire the marbles and then transport them. But once they fell out, they were held captive in different parts of France. Once all that happened, and he found himself facing financial ruin and turning desperately to the British state to buy the marbles from him and at least sort of salvage his financial situation. And this led to a series of debates in the British Parliament in 1816, above all. And in my last bit of the presentation, I will just go through some of the arguments that were heard in those 1916 debates and committee hearings. Now, in our own times, we have become quite sensitive to diplomats or foreign envoys who use their position to acquire personal assets, to the point where any diplomat of Britain or America or most democracies it faces a list of a gift that he or she may not accept. Indeed, there was a huge scandal in 2019 when the American Secretary of State accepted a bottle of whiskey from the Japanese. It was a good whiskey, admittedly, but this whiskey alone was considered a highly inappropriate action by the Secretary of State to accept this gift and then not to be able to account for it. Now, in 1816, people perhaps had looser ideas about the boundaries between public service and private acquisition, but nonetheless, Elgin faced a barrage of questions about the extent to which he had used his public office, that of ambassador, in order to acquire private assets. And he admitted under questioning that he couldn't have got those marbles if he weren't ambassador. And this was a source of very serious concern to many parliamentarians. They were worried about the precedent that was being set. What other arguments were heard? Well, another one was that it was simply too much money for the British state to be spending, even this modest amount of money that they were contemplating giving out at a time when there were many other calls on public money. This was a time when many veterans had come home from the Napoleonic Wars. Some of them were starving. There had been some terrible winters, which had its effect on the price of grain. So literally, people were looking for bread. And there was a famous cartoon to say, "Why is John Bull, England, in other words, why is it buying stones, bits of marble, when his numerous family want bread?" That was a powerful argument. Now, one of the first people to speak out against Elgin, above all because of the precedent that would be set, was a fine liberal politician from Ireland who'd been Chancellor of the Irish Exchequer and then moved his base to London after 1800. And he was above all concerned about the precedent that would be set if an ambassador were licensed to acquire precious objects in his own possession and ultimately, use them to his own benefit. He was confused in some ways. He was confused about the significance of the sculptures, but he was very clear-sighted about the very bad precedent that would be set by, as he put it, sanctioning acts of public robbery. Now, a more eccentric opponent was an artist art historian called Richard Payne Knight. He was a member of a fine group of people called the Dilettanti, who had encouraged the copying and the reproduction of ancient sculptures and done fine work in that respect. But he himself was perhaps not the best of the Dilettanti. He was a collector of pornography, among other things, and he took the eccentric view that these sculptures weren't actually very good. They were in fact Roman copies. Or he was asked, in what class of art do you place the finest works of this collection? He said, I would put them in the second rank, and only the finest I would put in the second rank. So this eccentric man, discouraged the purchase by saying that, frankly, these are not the best sculptures we could be buying. But from my point of view, far and away, the noblest of the parliamentary speakers who opposed the purchase of the marbles was a certain Hugh Hammersley, member of a very old English family. And he, exactly like Lord Byron, foresaw the day when there would be another stakeholder in this debate, not just the Ottomans, not just the British taxpayer, but not just Lord Elgin, but the future masters of Athens. And in the final moments of the debate, he proposed that there should be a promise made, a formal promise made, that the marbles are kept only in trust until they are demanded by the present or any future possessors of the city of Athens. And upon such demand, engages without question to restore them, as far as can be effected, to the places from whence they came, and that they shall be in the meantime carefully preserved. So this idea that the marbles, at the very most, were being stored in Britain, and that one day they should be sent back to Athens, that was already present in the debate as early as 1816. I'm going to conclude by referring to one final subgroup of reactions among northern travelers. some northern travelers to Athens stand out because they listened with a sympathetic ear to what people in Athens themselves were saying. Now that's if you look at the testimony given by Elgin and Philip Hunt in 1816, they claimed that nobody in Athens cared about the marbles, but among the more sensitive of the travelers, that was plainly not true. On the contrary, they had different ways of expressing their care, but many of the most sensitive travelers heard voices both from well-educated Athenians and also from simpler Athenians that were profoundly disturbed by the removal of the marbles. And one of my favorite testimonies in this respect comes from an eccentric Irish poet, very prolific poet. Nobody reads his poems very much, but they should read what he wrote about his impressions of Athens. He heard ordinary people talking in particular about the caryatid removed by Elgin, and this very widespread story among ordinary people that the 5 remaining caryatids were in mourning for their sister. On the second night of her captivity, her 5 remaining sisters were heard to lament with loud sobbings her fate and their own loss. All night long, as the story goes, the voice of lamentation was echoed among the pillars and wafted eastward over the sea. Now that's nicely put by an Irish poet, but let me assure you there were many other travelers to Athens who heard similar stories, and if they were honest, they reported those stories. I will conclude by saying that I'm no relation whatever of Edward Daniel Clarke, despite the name, but I'm quite proud to be a great nephew of Sir John Newport, who was one of the first speakers to question Elgin's actions.
Dr. Clarke, thank you for this interesting and, in my opinion, not yet known moment of the story of the marbles. It is interesting to know that reactions against Elgin's actions in the Acropolis in Athens were immediate, and by many people of Great Britain. And the fact that Lord Byron is always, we say that it is the first to protest, is not absolutely true, because most other important persons, even before him, have protested against the theft, we can say, of the marbles from Athens. Now, we will continue, and the second speaker is Miss Elena Korka. Yes. Miss Korka is PhD archaeologist, Honorary Director General of Antiquities of the Ministry of Culture, Greece. She has carried out the most extensive research in archives internationally, as well as the Elgin's estate in Broomhall, Scotland, regarding the circumstances and fraudulent legality of the removal of the Parthenon marbles by Lord Elgin. She was selected by former famous Minister of Culture, Melina Mercouri, who launched the campaign for the return of the Parthenon marbles as the competent civil servant for the policy and negotiation issues. Her PhD is a full research on the topic. She has published many articles, participated in conferences and documentaries on the issue in Greece and abroad. She has been honored for her immense contribution by many international committees for the reunification of the Parthenon marbles. Ms. Korka will speak on historical documentation regarding the removal of the Parthenon marbles. Please, you may start your conference.
Thank you, Mr. Maurice. I am very grateful to Bruce for this wonderful and very enlightening introduction and placing us in time and area, meaning Athens at the beginning of the 1900s. And I shall deal with the question. Did the Ottomans authorize Lord Elgin to strip the Parthenon of its sculptures? Can we today really know the facts and the data? Therefore, was Elgin a savior, or was he a villain? And was he such a villain that finally today the term Elginism refers to the notion of brutal destruction of cultural property? And furthermore, did the British state acquire the marbles in full knowledge of the facts? In consequence, are the marbles legally retained in London? These questions persist throughout the years and haunt every relevant discussion and debate. The legality of the propriety of the Parthenon marbles by Lord Elgin was contested, as Bruce clearly explained to us, from the very time of the removal of these sculptures and from the very time that the British state authorized the grouping of a select committee, which preceded the discussion in Parliament, and then a final discussion in Parliament, which ended up by acquiring the Parthenon marbles, sorry, of course, for that. And really, what happened is something that we must scrutinize. So this is what we shall do tonight. Now, Hunt, as we heard, produced during the select committee discussion at a later date the English translation of the Italian translation, which the dragoman of the British embassy, Pisani, had drafted after Elgin managed to get under the table a letter from Kaimakam Syed Abdullah Pasha. Now, the Italian translation does probably connect to the English translation, but Hunt definitely used the words he wanted to when he deposited this English translation before the Select Committee of the House of Commons. Now, this is the Italian translation, which was drafted by Pisani, and Lady Elgin said that he bet even his whiskers on the accuracy of this translation. But it was a translation of an unofficial letter given totally on a friendly basis to Elgin by the Kaimakam Pasha in Constantinople in 1801, with the purpose to help Elgin's team in Athens to simply work and draw, measure, take casts, and perhaps, as Bruce referred, take from the debris that had fallen around the Parthenon some inscriptions on maybe a sculpture, but nothing more than that. And even this letter clearly states that no damage would befall the Parthenon itself. So even through this text, we cannot find any legality for the stripping of the Parthenon from its marbles, which stood on the building itself. It definitely was not a firman, as Bruce mentioned, because a firman bears the tugra, the signet of the Sultan, and according to the Sharia, the unwritten Ottoman law, of course, the Sultan was the only person in the empire that could authorize the taking of any marbles of any pieces of any building, because all that belonged to the Sultan himself. So actually, Elgin, all along his efforts to remove the marbles, transport them to England and sell them to the state, had many times been obliged to invent tales of legal cover-up, for the simple reason that he never acquired permission by the Sultan to remove the sculptures. Actually, the Sultan himself never learned about what Elgin's team did in Athens. Now, these fiction stories were based on phantom documents which never really existed, or on documents which had existed, but which had a totally different content than what they were said to hold. Most of these letters were considered to be lost. This facilitated the persuasiveness of the fiction narrative. The whole British argumentation has been based on these missing documents. Since then, however, all crucial lost Ottomans have been discovered, and they show what the truth really was. All this has been published and is broadly known. Questioning again and again the issue of legality just leads us in circles, as if there were any doubt. And this is exactly what the British side wants. So let's look into the legal documents and how they ensued and what they really held. Now, what, through the research that I carried out, occurred was that I discovered these documents that were supposedly lost in various archives. And the Elgin estate was really, I would say, a thesaurus of great knowledge, which had been detained for a great time. So I should say that research is a magical way of finding things that maybe no one had noticed since then, or it was time for them to occur and ensue, and the truth is really known today. So let's look at really what happened. All official requests to the Sublime Porte by the embassy at the time of Lord Elgin were duly mentioned in the registry of the British Embassy. Now, in the Elgin estate, I happened to find this logbook of the British Embassy and all the requests that were addressed to the Ottoman authorities in Constantinople. Now, why Elgin chose to remove this registry and keep it among his papers in Broom Hall is a very interesting issue. So what you find is in there are all the official requests, such as travel requests for Elgin, his family, as we heard from Bruce, his in-laws, even Reverend Hunt coming to Athens time and again. And all these are clearly noted, but only that we do find the documents themselves that were the travel documents which permitted these persona of the time to travel. So why is Elgin's request for his team not among those captions there is no mention of his request to the Kaimakam for the entrance of his team to the Acropolis. Now, that is bizarre. And this proves that the letter was unofficially given to Elgin, as Elgin, on a personal basis, had very good relations to the Kaimakam. He was invited to the Elgin home. He was given very many presents. They exchanged letters. Every time Elgin had a child, the Kaimakam, of course, sent him a letter and presents for his family. So that shows a lot that went on in the background. Now, not only can we detect that this was done under the table because there is no mention in of course, this logbook, which is very, very important and which runs from 1801 till 1803, when Elgin left his embassy. What we also see through the documents that occurred officially, meaning the travel documents that Elgin acquired, is that Elgin never really told the truth about why he wished to visit Athens or why he even sent Hunt to Athens. Not only was this hidden from the Ottoman authorities, but this was also hidden from the British authorities. So it's really a great fiction story which happened on both sides. So when Elgin sent Hunt to Athens, supposedly on an official mission, to see whether Athens had the proper fortifications to resist an attack by Napoleon, because supposedly Elgin had secret information that Napoleon, of all places, would definitely attack Athens. So Hunt is supposedly to come to Athens for this diplomatic purpose. However, in the catalogue of letters which he carries with him, and they are officially addressed to various Ottoman authorities for his trip to Athens and other places around Athens, there is no mention of the Kaimakam's letter. Now, why would that be if it was such an official letter? Not only that, but I spotted a letter which at that very time, in July 1801, when Hunt is going to travel to Athens, Elgin sends a letter to the British authorities. And he says, of course, I do have some plans of personal gratification in Athens, but I have not made the Ottomans acquainted with this. And it is an issue of antiquities all over Greece, which at the end may prove useful to the British state as well. So where is the salvation of the marbles as his purpose from the very beginning? And why are not these so openly stated in all these documents he addresses either to the Ottomans or his own British authorities? Now, what I also spotted while I was looking at the archives, and I really wish to thank the Elgin family for providing me with the possibility to look into these archives, I spotted another Italian translation of a document which must have existed, and we know that two letters existed after Elgin came to Athens, and the Ottoman authorities asked him for help because their lives were at stake. If the Sultan found out what they had allowed to happen on the Acropolis, they would probably lose their lives. So they asked both the voivode, the governor of Athens and the Disdar as well, who was the governor of the fort, the citadel of the Acropolis. They were in great fear. And this we also know because of Lady Elgin's letter to her husband when he was traveling around Athens to gather various antiquities from very interesting places, like in the Peloponnese or the Boeotia or other areas that were so rich in antiquities. And he chose those places to visit of all others. So she had to write letters to him as she remained in Athens, and she had to persuade the captains of the British ships to take the heavy crates in which the Elgin marbles had to be packed to be transported through the British Navy to England. So she says that she had to circulate rumors that Elgin had acquired many other firmans that definitely covered up for what had happened in Athens and on the Acropolis. There was even fear among the two Greek headmasters of the Athenian workers who took part in this, because everyone was very poor at that time. And Elgin, as Bruce mentioned, gave very high prizes to his workers to help with such a big enterprise that he had set up in Athens. So even they feared for their lives. Even the Greek paramanas, the ladies who took care of the children of the Elgin family, were in fear of their lives. So there was something, may I say, very fishy going on. Now, as the authorities in Athens asked from Elgin when he came to Athens in 1802, for cover-up letters, that is, Elgin, when he went back to Constantinople, did ask for these letters. Now, on the left, what I show you are traveling documents and the way that they were drafted. The Ottomans had a very strict protocol about how they wrote their letters. So you see that even a traveling document has many official stamps and seals and is drafted in a specific way. Can you imagine what a firman looks like? It is a highly official document. So Elgin went to the Grand Vizier to ask for letters of recommendation regarding the voivode and the Dizdar. Now, the vizier, the Grand Vizier, definitely did wish to comply to Elgin's wishes, because what he said was that he was very well accommodated with his family when he came to Athens. So this is what the Grand Vizier, Gazi Yusuf Pasha, wrote in 1802. Now, this, what you see on the right, the 3 pages, are the Italian translation, again by Pisani, of one of these documents sent by the Grand Vizier to the authorities in Athens. Now, what does it state? That the team Elgin had sent could continue to draw and make casts and make gravures, and that is all. Is that what they were doing? So Elgin could not acquire cover-up for the removals that had taken place on the Acropolis. What he asked the Grand Vizier to do is simply encourage the Athenian authorities to allow Elgin's team to draw, put up scaffolds, and prepare drawings and nothing else. So the document exists and it is very, very clear. Now, what we should also take into consideration is that at that time, From the very beginning of the removals of the Parthenon marbles, that is in 1801, Ioannis Berizelos, the only scholar among the Athenians at the time, who mostly were illiterate, wrote the history of the city of Athens. And actually, it finishes about 1801 after the removal started on the Acropolis. What does he clearly state? That there was no permission for the removal of the marbles. So that was common knowledge at the time. Not only that, but I spotted in the diaries of one of these travelers, the dilettanti, as Bruce mentioned before, that one of them had actually seen the letter that the Kaimekam had sent to the voivode and the distar regarding what Elgin's supposed to be a firman of permission, and everyone knew that it was not, because when the traveler asked the voivode, "What is this?" Then someone explained, because it was in Osmanli, of course, that there was no permission for Elgin to take away any sculptures from the Parthenon, but only some stones that may lie around. So everyone knew what was going on. Not only did the Ottomans in Athens know, not only did Elgin know and all his team, but everyone else. So everything else is a fiction story. Now, let us proceed. What happened later on was that Elgin, after being liberated by the French, who had, as Bruce mentioned, captivated him and kept him in France. So when he went back, he had to deal with his divorce, as we heard, and he had run out of money. So he had first to try and sell his collection, but only the first part of his collection had arrived in England. What had happened to the second half? Because, of course, as we said, Elgin had left in 1803. The rest could not leave because the ambassadors that followed Elgin at the embassy were not in favor of what had happened and totally banned any work that Luzieri could do on the Acropolis. So until 1808, when Sir Robert Adair was posted as British ambassador at Constantinople, nothing could move. The crates with the marbles were covered under stones, under horrible conditions, and lay at the Piraeus, waiting for the transport through Malta to the English ports. Elgin was in London and trying to sell what he could to the British government. So the difficulty was when Elgin wrote Sir Robert Adair about getting his second collection out of Athens. And Adair comes back to him with a letter clearly saying that the Ottoman authorities denied that Elgin had any right on the marbles, that he had no authorization to remove them. So Elgin was stuck and trapped. What could he do? So he came back to Adair and he gave him instructions as to what he had to do, follow the Elgin track. So Adair was obliged to offer 1,480 piastres and 100 English pounds to high officials in Constantinople, as well as a gift to the Kaimekam, the value of which has not been specified, in order for the Antiquities to finally leave the Piraeus in 1811. Can you imagine how difficult that was? And that happened because the French had been wiped out of Athens when Elgin started his first removal of the Parthenon sculptures from the Acropolis. He had persuaded the Ottomans that all the French residents were dangerous, and they were all removed from Athens and incarcerated in an island outside Constantinople. Fauvel, who was the previous consul to Athens and had tried to remove, we must admit that, pieces from the Parthenon, had not managed to do that. So no one else had managed to do it. And after that, the Greek Revolution broke out. So nothing like what Elgin did could have ever have happened. And it was not for their salvation, as he wrote in his letters later on. So what happened is that Fauvel informed the Ottomans that things were going on that were not so legal from Elgin's team. So what happened was that after these bribes that we heard about, and here is a document which seems to have ensued from the Caimacam at the time of Sir Robert Adair, being addressed to the Sublime Porte for some crates in which Elgin had placed some images and some vases that he had bought in Athens when he was there. This is what this Ottoman document, which you clearly see on the screen, states. You can see the translation. Now, this document was spotted by Taghi Shariat Panahi, who is a very important scholar regarding Osmanli, and very few people can read Osmanli, and this was spotted in the Sultan archives in Constantinople a few years ago, as I guided him through the years, because of course these letters were misplaced and the date given to them was much later, meaning 1812, so they were not easy to spot. However, here it is. This supposedly was the content of the letter that let the ships receive the crates with the supposed vases and images that Elgin had acquired by buying them from Athens. No Acropolis mentioned. How come if this was so official at the time? So the difficulty which Elgin had with the specific sentence that Adair had written him, and I quote here, Mr. Pisani, the dragoman, as we said, of the British Embassy, more than once assured me that the port absolutely denied your having any property in those marbles. So what could Elgin do with such a letter in order to persuade the British government now to buy the marbles? Because legality was contested from the very beginning about Elgin's acquisitions. So what did Elgin do? Continue his fiction stories. Now, it's really interesting because during my archival research, I happened to find the correspondence between Elgin and Sir Robert Adair. Now, Elgin asked Adair to modify what was in his original letter, and he specifically asked Adair to shift the balance of his sentence and take the balance off what the Ottomans in Constantinople said and put all the blame on the Athenian authorities. It was supposedly them who sold the marbles to Elgin. He had no idea that this was illegal. He bought them in good faith, even though no buying or selling took place. only huge bribes and presents were often offered on Elgin's side to the Ottoman authorities in Athens. And how do we clearly know this? Because Liritzis kept a logbook with all the sums that he had to give, because this was Elgin's money, let's not forget, and it was precious. So he had to write down what he spent for cord, for wood, for gypsum, whatever, for the casts, and also the level of bribes he had to give. And these bribes are immense. Even St. William St. Clair, who wrote about the Elgin issue and the removal of the Parthenon marbles, says that the Dizdar acquired 35 times his salary of 1 year through these bribes. Can you imagine the height of them? Apart from the presents. So Adair has to change what he told Elgin and put all the blame on the Athenians. It was they who acted without authority. And this is their correspondence. Elgin asks Adair to change the letter, and here we see on the right Adair's letter, which is a draft, and he tries to scribble and write and rewrite his sentences so as to comply with what Elgin asked him to do. He really wasn't happy about it, as we can see through his scribbling clearly on the right. Now, Elgin wrote back saying that this was perfect for him and that everything would be fine if Adair sent him this letter, which they agreed upon, and sent it clearly. And this letter was found through an auction house, which sold the letter to an unknown buyer in 2003. So all the documents clearly prove that there was no legality, only fairy tales. And Elgin, when he wrote to Spencer Perceval, the prime minister in 1811, clearly had shifted the balance to the Ottomans in Athens, as we see through this letter, which was written by Elgin and addressed to Spencer Perceval. But as we know, Spencer Perceval died, and this is why the acquisition of the Parthenon marbles happened much later, as we heard from Bruce. So at the very end, the British side knows that the documents exist. Why is all this happening? It's a bargain. It's a well-kept bargain. But is this what we want today? Is this moral? Is this what our wish is regarding the protection of heritage and where it should be displayed? So I leave you with this question for the discussion later on. Thank you very much for your close attention.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Korka, for your excellent talk, which gives us the opportunity to review and learn also all the historical details, and particularly to see how difficult it is to find and know the truth, which is the common objective of all science, and this explains why animatology also is interested in the history of marbles and sculpture removal from Athens to London. So unfortunately, we're a little bit late, and I will ask the last speaker, Professor Irini Stamatoudi, from the University of Nicosia and also the university, the branch they have in Athens, UNIC. Irini Stamatoudi is also an attorney at law before the Supreme Court in Greece. She specialized in copyright and cultural heritage law, and some of her writings are considered worldwide works of reference. She is one of the pivotal negotiators in the Parthenon marbles issue, having served as a legal and policy advisor in negotiation with the British from 1999 to 2018. Professor Stamatoudi will speak on Greek and British arguments on the Parthenon marbles dispute, the latest developments. Professor Stamatoudi, you have the floor.
Good evening. I'm trying to share my screen, so please give me a minute because for some reason it doesn't let me do so. No, I don't know why it does not allow me to share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
We can see, you can put it in the full.
I have put it in full screen.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
So good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be in this forum. I'll try and be quick and not tire you too much. I'll be talking about the Greek and British arguments and the latest developments. You have heard from Bruce Clark and Elena Korka the history of the issue, and now we're moving into policies, politics, and negotiations. The Parthenon marbles case is one of the most famous cultural heritage cases worldwide. It is pending before UNESCO since 1982, and it has been put on the agenda of the Intergovernmental Committee for Promoting the Return of Cultural Treasures to the Countries of Origin in 1984. It has a particularity. Many cases since then has been put on the agenda of this committee. They have all been resolved apart from the Parthenon marbles case. So it is one of the most long-lasting cases that exist. Now, when Greeks ask the marbles back from the British Museum, the British Museum says, even if I wanted to give them back, I wouldn't be allowed because the British Museum Act 1963 does not allow me to give away pieces from my collection, but only in certain cases specified in the law. The relevant section is Section 5 of the British Museum Act, and one of these circumstances under which someone can return an artifact is if that artifact, in the opinion of the trustees, is unfit to be retained in the collections of the museum and can be disposed of without detriment to students' interests. Of course, the British Museum argues that this is not a case for something like the Parthenon marbles or something that comes under the same circumstances. Yet, there has been a legal opinion that has been deposited with the British Museum concerning the Ethiopian tablets that were removed from Ethiopia in 1868 by British troops after the capture of Magdala. And there, the Samantha Knights QC said that such artifacts can also be considered unfit, in fact, opening the door for such an interpretation for the Parthenon marbles too. However, when one listens to the British Museum that the law does not allow it to return artifacts, one thinks that generally artifacts cannot be returned from Britain to their countries of origin. Is that true? The answer is no. I want to remind you that there were people asking back for human Aboriginal remains from Australia and New Zealand that were removed by the British until late 1940s. And the British government has in fact issued the Human Tissue Act of 2004, enabling British museums, including the British Museum itself, to return artifacts to Australia and New Zealand. Another occasion is the Holocaust Act of 2009. In fact, there were advisory committees since 2006 dealing with Nazi art, and not only the British state enacted the Holocaust Act 2009, giving the power to 17 UK national institutions to return artifacts that were lost during the Nazi era to their original owners, but it also proposed in a UK government-hosted international conference in London that there should be stronger efforts from the international community to accelerate the processes of identification and return. Another case which is very interesting is the La Costa Ghost Dance shirt. In fact, American Indians believed that these shirts had the power to save them from the white man, to protect them from the bullets during the war. And such a shirt was found in Kelvin Grown Art Gallery in Glasgow, and at the end it was returned to the Lakota Sioux Indian community in 1998. When the head of the Glasgow Museums and Galleries was giving evidence to the House of Commons, he said that legislative constraints should not be used to discourage broader public policy arguments and informed public debate. One would argue, yes, but it was done on the basis of the change of law, and it did not concern the British Museum in some cases. Yes, but the British Museum has also returned artifacts despite of the British Museum Act 1963. How did it do that? It did that on the basis of renewable long-term loans. One such example is the Namgis mask. The Namgis mask represents an ancestral being, probably the chief of the undersea kingdom, and the British Museum returned the COLLOQUIUM mask to Allard Bay in Canada as a long-term loan in 2005, and until today, this mask has not been returned to the British Museum. Another example are the Lewis chessmen, 6 chess pieces, medieval chess pieces from walrus ivory that were discovered in 1831 on Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. They were given back to Scotland, to the Lewis Castle Museum, as a long-term loan in 2014. Now, the question that arises here is, who owns the marbles? Here we have 2 diverging views. Britain says that it has legally acquired the marbles, and not only that, but they are also British cultural heritage according to the Waverley criteria, whilst Greece argues that they have been illegally acquired and they are part of its national culture heritage. Now the question arises, was there an authorization for old Ergin's team to dismantle the temple? You have heard a lot about that, so I don't want to repeat myself. I just want to draw your attention to 2 issues. First, there was no firman. There was only a letter by Kamakam Pasha that was known as Buyurdi that authorized him not to take away the stones that were on the temple, but take away any stones with inscriptions or figures fallen on the ground. Because this letter, and not firman, letter, because it was only the Sultan that could issue a firman, would not allow Elgin's team to make casts if they could have taken the originals. Why authorize them make casts if they could take the originals? So in fact, no authorization was there. And on top of that, Lord Elgin misused his position to gain access to the Acropolis and bribed in order to exceed his authorization. When the British state acquired the collection in 1816 for 35,000 sterling pounds, they did not have access to the full documentation. In fact, they decided to acquire the marbles without having in hand any documentation concerning as to how the marbles left the Acropolis site. Now, did Elgin want to save the marbles? Of course not. He collected them to decorate his country house in Scotland, in Broomhall, and there are also designs in that respect as to how the decoration would take place. Of course, he then went bankrupt and had to sell them to the British state. In fact, before Elgin visited Greece, he asked the British state whether they would be interested in him acquiring any artifacts from Greece. And the answer to Elgin was a blatant no. So why would the British state tell him that they were not interested in him collecting ancient artifacts? From that, it can be proven that Lord Elgin collected them to decorate his country house. Now, are we here to accuse Elgin? Of course not. The goal is not to hold anyone liable for the past, but to focus on how we can rectify the damage done, the effects of which still affects us today. Now, it is very interesting to see that the British Museum has run out of arguments somewhere at the beginning of 2000. So they had to come up with a new idea in order to be able to support themselves against all those claims for return of artifacts to their countries of origin. So they came up with a declaration on the importance and value of universal museums that was signed by 18 museums of Europe and North America in 2002. And this declaration is about the theory of universal museum. In fact, these museums argue that they are universal institutions that hold artifacts from different civilizations in one place on behalf and for the sake of humanity. They state that we should acknowledge that museums serve not just the citizens of one nation, but the people of every nation. So in fact, they say that we need to keep these artifacts that come from different civilizations in order to allow visitors to compare between the different cultures. So we're an encyclopedic museum, and if you read between the lines, you'll understand that these universal and encyclopedic museums are better museums perhaps than the rest. They're museums of another pedigree, and they have a good reason to keep even what is looted. In this context, the British Museum has published a declaration on its site. It provides that the approach of the Acropolis Museum and the British Museum are complementary. The Acropolis Museum, where half of the collection of the marbles is found, provides an in-depth view of the ancient history of its city. The British Museum, where the other half is found, offers a sense of the wider cultural context and sustained interaction with the neighboring civilizations of Egypt and the Near East, which contributed to the unique achievements of ancient Greece. As you may imagine, these 18 museums are just 18. Let's see what the stance of the other several hundreds or thousands of museums are, which form, in fact, the majority of the museums in the world. As Mr. Singh said, that is the director of an Indian museum, says that the museums, in fact, the British Museum's universalism is an ideological position that has its own history and its own politics, and the Universal Museum is fighting to protect its own heritage, not the world's. Why should the marbles return to Greece? First of all, Athens is the place of origin of the Parthenon marbles. This is where the idea of the Parthenon temple was conceived and realized. They were not just removed because they are not standalone objects. That's why we usually refer to them as marbles and not as sculptures, but were sawn off abruptly and violently from the temple, destroying it. Today, They are essentially split between two museums, despite the fact that the temple and the site still survive and constitute World Heritage and #1 of the list of the European cultural heritage. If they return, and I hope when they return, they will be unified in their natural and historical context. And this is the best way to serve humanity. And of course, the trend today in cultural heritage law is the return of cultural treasures to their countries of origin. And apart from all the scientific arguments, apart from the archaeological arguments, the humanitarian arguments, the historical arguments, there is also the argument of common sense. When something is broken and detached, it does not convey the beauty and the information it conveys as a whole. And this is a fact. Let's see how simple people feel about it. In 2021, in a survey conducted by Britain's YouGov, there were 59% in favor of the return of the marbles, 18% in favor of retaining them in Britain, and 22% that they didn't know, probably they didn't know what the marbles were. In 2022, the Sunday Times conducted a survey with its subscribers, and these are conservative subscribers. And they said that 78% of the newspaper's readers voted in favor of the return of the Parthenon marbles to Greece. Very recently, in September 2025, there was a poll by JL Partners for the Parthenon project. And there, 54% of the participants were in favor of the return, 29% against, and 17% did not know. Well, I'm amazed after all those debates and after so many years that there's still 17% that do not know. Let's look at the latest developments. Let's go a bit back to 2021. In the 22nd session of the UNESCO Intergovernmental Committee, for the first time, this committee issued not only a recommendation, but also a decision. And when we're referring to a committee in UNESCO, we don't mean a small group of people that were put there, but we in fact refer to member states. So the committee urges Britain to reconsider its stance and enter talks with Greece. In fact, it acknowledges the intergovernmental character of the dispute and the fact that the Greek claim is just, fair, and legal. And this is very, very important. I have underlined the intergovernmental part because Britain for many, many years argued, perhaps not lately, that this is not an issue and it should not be an issue between governments, but it should be an issue between museums. That's why we have this peculiarity where the Greek government discusses the issue with the British Museum and the British Museum discusses the issue with the Greek government. We see how many prime ministers changed in the last years. Boris Johnson, he was initially in favor of the return. When he gained his post, he forgot about it. Then Liz Truss against, Rishi Sunak against, and that takes us to Keir Starmer. Let me go back to the days of Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak has scheduled a meeting with Mitsotakis, the Greek Prime Minister, in November 2023. However, Mr. Mitsotakis went on TV and compared the fragmented sculpture frieze to the Mona Lisa being cut in half. Rishi Sunak got very angry and cancelled the talks with the Greek Prime Minister. However, he gave a push to the matter. Keir Starmer turned against him in the parliament and said, Rishi's lost his marbles. And then Prince Charles, to support the Greek request, wore a tie with the Greek flags, with the Greek flag. George Osborne, he was still then president of the trustees of the British Museum. In fact, somehow turned against Rishi Sunak, and he said, we can go on doing whether or not Rishi Sunak meets the Greek prime minister or not. He said he was devoted to continue the talks. Keir Starmer, that was then at the opposition, said that he would not stand in the way if a deal was struck by the British Museum and the Greek government. And we in Greece were all very, very happy that Keir Starmer won the election. What solutions are there? First of all, there is the solution of the creative interpretation of the British Museum Act of 1963 on the basis of this wording that I talked to you about the marbles being unfit for the British Museum, especially because they were acquired under the conditions they were acquired. The other solution is the change of law, as happened with the Nazi art and the Human Remains Act. Another solution would be a long-term renewable loan, as the case was with the Namgis mask and the Louis Chessman. Another solution would be the Charities Act 2022. What are the sticking points in negotiations? Britain discusses a loan. Greece wants return in exchange for blockbuster exhibitions of Greek artifacts. Where do we stand today? I'm afraid we have made progress, but not as much progress as we would have hoped. First of all, the UK government, the British government said that there will be no change of law. What is extremely disappointing is that they have changed the law, but to the detriment of the Greek request. In fact, there was a negative change to the Charities Act 2022, according to which they no longer allow 17 museums to give back artifacts, which was a legal basis which the British Museum could have used to return back the marbles to Greece. That is a very bad sign. Also, the British Museum no longer talks about long-term loans. They now speak about short-term loan up to 3 years and for only part of the sculptures, something that Greece would never accept. There is, of course, the opportunity of the refurbishment of the British Museum, including the Juvian Gallery, that will cost the British Museum £1 billion. But I increasingly get the impression that the British Museum no longer sees that as an opportunity. Sometimes I wonder what it would take for the British Museum to understand what it feels like to have one of your most emblematic monuments fragmented. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't take too much of your time.
Thank you very much, Professor Stamatoudi, for your clear and exhaustive talk concerning the subject. And you gave us the opportunity to know in detail what happened between the time of Melina Mercouri and now concerning the return of the monuments in Athens. Anyway, they cannot say now that there is no an appropriate museum to receive the marbles, because the new museum that was inaugurated in 2008 or 9 and was constructed by Bernard Tchoumi, the most famous architect who is based in Basel, Switzerland, no more allows British to have this excuse. We hope that the public opinion is so powerful that will oblige the British to find a solution for the return of the marbles, and we need to find also something that we French we say pour sauver la façade. That means to give them in order not to feel that they have completely lost this game. So now, really, we have finished, but we still have approximately half an hour for some questions. Please, I need to we have some questions, but it is impossible to read because there's no question.
Yeah.
Klaus Meinzer has raised his hand.
Yeah. Coming back to my introduction where I mentioned Bavaria, the modern Greek state was founded in the 19th century by a Bavarian prince, Otto, and they introduced the modern legal administration and things like that. So my question is to all three speakers. The first two concerning the archaeology, and the third one concerning the law. What is known about the influence of Bavaria in the midst of the 19th century? In your talks, there was a dominance of the United Kingdom and their role as archaeology. But I remember in the end of the 19th century, in the time of the German Empire, also great German archaeologists were active, Schliemann and others in Greece. What about this influence and now modern requests of Greece now to Germany or even Bavaria?
Well, just as a beginning of an answer, you can see much German and Bavarian influence in the layout of modern Athens, in certain buildings, including the Greek Parliament, which was originally the Royal Palace. And a lot of the layout of Athens was planned by either German or German-trained architects and city planners. So certainly there was a huge, and I would say on the whole, benign influence of German tastes and German ideas about planning. Now, of course, the contest over the marbles happened in a very specific context of the Napoleonic Wars, which first and foremost concerned Britain and France. And that was the point when the kind of amateurish, in the literal sense, amateurish interest of northern travelers in Greece suddenly turned into a ruthless geopolitical contest. And that contest really involved Britain and France above all other countries.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to switch your question around in a sense and say that the Parthenon influenced buildings all through Germany, of course, and because of Otto's rule, very many buildings in Berlin and Munich, of course, and elsewhere are highly influenced by the Parthenon. And that this radiation, this inspiration, which is forever there, is interesting as it joined countries together. And of course, at the time that Otto ruled, Greece was independent and had a very strict law concerning the protection of antiquities and cultural heritage. Now, nonetheless, a few fragments from the Parthenon, through other ways, totally different than what Elgin did, are in certain German museums. So I think that it be wonderful if you could persuade these German museums to participate in the effort for reunification, because this is what it's all about, the reunification of this unique European symbol and symbol of Western civilization, all together and all share and participate in it. So I liked your question extremely much because it goes both ways, you think. So as an archaeologist, I'm very grateful because very many German archaeologists were part of the archaeological service of Greece when it first started functioning as a state. And their work is truly great. And we refer to them. Actually, even my excavation in ancient Tanea had to do with German archaeologists going to Tanea to excavate. And this is how the Kuros ended up, because an Austrian ambassador did not keep the law, you see. So there's so much that we can do regarding cultural heritage today. But the Parthenon is unique. And this is why I think our conference takes place and the European Academy takes interest. It is part of all of us. We all wish to share in the reunification.
The European Academy.
Ça, c'est ce qui a fait Academy of Science and Arts.
I have now received a question from someone, from a person that lives Athens, Greece. I understand that the Parthenon sculptures will, in all probability, be moved temporarily to be on display while the space and that of the exhibits of Egypt, Greece, and Rome in the British Museum undergoes major renovation. However commodious their temporary housing will be, it will not be a space designed and built to evoke their full splendor. Is then not this an opportunity to test the display of the Parthenon sculpture right next to their Athens brethren? For a short time, to be sure, people will have a chance to admire nearly the entire Parthenon frieze, as they have not had for more than 200 years, in a space purpose built for them in the new Metropolis Museum. So, who wants to...
Une question.
Okay.
Oui, mais de gens qui ne suivent pas.
Non, voyez un message téléphonique.
Someone has to mute their microphone.
Yes.
Dikonto Ioannis or something. MDI, please mute yourself.
So,
il fume sa pipe.
Oui, ils disent ce qu'il faut faire.
I thought I could say a few words about that. I think the mic that is open is from Clio, I think, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps Clio should mute their mic. I think that Greek people and Greek governments are not ready, and I'm not sure will ever be ready, to receive a temporary loan of what they consider their own culture heritage. I think it will either be a solution that it is permanent return, or it will be very difficult to reach a solution. It doesn't matter, I think, how we call this return, whether it's a long-term loan, renewable, whatever, as long as it is permanent exhibition in its natural and historical context, because the goal is reunification. You cannot reunify something and then what? Break it again and give half of it back? Because this is the goal. The goal is not just coexist as separate parts, because they are not separate parts. They're integral parts of a sculpture and architectural whole.
Yes, I fully understand the arguments, but also I can say that if for 3 or 5 years you have all the sculptures reunified, then you are going to have more than I don't know how many millions of visitors that will admire and see the difference between having reunified and separate. And then I think that the reaction of the public opinion will be so aggressive and severe that the British government will never dare to take back again the sculptures, and they will be obliged by the facts to
Donc, il ne peut pas être dans notre association internationale.
Oui, mais enfin, il a son idée. C'est peut-être que c'est vrai que si c'était.
I don't know whether the organizers.
Foti, you have to mute. Dikon to Ioannis. I sent them an email, but it's still on. The sound is still on. Can you mute it yourself?
There is
No, huh?
I don't know. There is someone known as Clio, but we cannot see the question.
The next question.
The next question is not a question, it's a remark by Professor Peter Stone that there was criticism about this ex gratia exclusion regime from the Charities Act 2022. And the British, in fact, Ministry of Culture is reconsidering it, which is very, very good news. Thank you very much, Peter Stone, for that remark.
Do we have any other question or comments?
Yeah, if I may ask Irini Stamatoudi, here Korka, I think the Acropolis Museum does have space. Now it has replaced the originals with some copies. I mean, there is room in the museum, isn't there, for including the marbles?
Absolutely. That was the reason for having the Acropolis Museum, in order to be able to house the full collection. This is how the Acropolis Museum was designed. Now there are temporary some casts there, but when the originals come, they will be unified with the other originals.
Furthermore, already certain pieces that were taken away from the Parthenon, as we said, in a totally different way than how Elgin acted, and were in Italy, in the Vatican also, and in Heidelberg in Germany. And this is actually the very first case of return, the one that came from Heidelberg. And we really congratulate the German scholars for taking this decision upon themselves. They all returned, the museums that I referred to, whether universitarian or state museums or the Vatican itself, they returned their fragments of the Parthenon sculptures to Greece without anything in return, just for the purpose of reunifying the sculptures next to the monument to which they belong. So these pieces are attached to the other original pieces in the Parthenon exhibition in the New Acropolis Museum. This is what is going to happen to all the fragments that exist everywhere, because it is inevitable. We all see that this is what needs to be done. All Pauls lead there. All people who are involved write in favor for this reunification. This is why we are here, as I said. We're to see how we can share these pieces all together, and no one is being alienated or cast away from the sculptures. The sculptures belong to the Parthenon, and this monument was created for the whole world, which is civilized. This is what we need to do, a civilized act for this unique monument.
Thank you very much. Elena, do we have any other question or comment? Bruce, do you want to say anything?
I will heartily endorse what my fellow speakers have said.
where do we stand today? Are we hopeful that some progress is being made?
Well, if I might answer that, I think that progress will be made when public opinion in many countries, but above all Britain, is really mobilized, and it becomes an issue about which people feel passionate. And that's why public education is so important. And I would say public education among the young in particular, among a generation who don't necessarily learn about Greek history or the Greek language at school. I feel this will gain political traction to the effect that public opinion, to the extent that public opinion is really mobilized. And for that, you need knowledge, you need the dissemination of the basic facts, images, and that's what will make the difference.
I would like to add one more thing, which definitely should come from Peter Stone, much more than myself. We both participated in the World Archaeological Congress last year. And I would really appreciate if we could hear about the vote of the World Archaeological Congress, which took place last year and which endorses the issue of reunification as a motion which should take place according to the opinion of all these archaeologists worldwide. So this is to show that people do feel strongly and are involved in the issue and are waiting for it to happen.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other comment?
May
Yes.
I?
Of
Sorry,
course.
I'm
Please.
Peter Stone. So Elena has just asked me to say a few words. For those of you who don't know the organization, the World Archaeological Congress has been in existence since the mid-1980s and held its 10th four-yearly Congress in Australia last year. And one of the sessions was about restitution. And following that session, as in the way that WAC, World Archaeological Congress, works, a resolution from the session went to the plenary session of the Congress. That was passed. That resolution then went to the Council of the World Archaeological Congress, and they have passed that. And so it is now the policy of the organization. I don't have the text in front of me, but it is, as Elena says, that the World Archaeological Congress fully supports, and I can't remember the word used, the return, the restitution, whatever, reunification, I think, of the sculptures as soon as possible. But I presume that council resolution, it will be now or very soon on the website of the World Archaeological Congress.
That's very important.
Thank you very much. This is very important. And this is a very strong resolution for the reunification of the marbles. Do you have any other question, Professor Buntis?
I just want to thank the participants. I guess I'm speaking on behalf of many. This was one of the most, how to say, detailed and well-exposed set of arguments. I have the feeling we are coming closer to some point, that we are not turning in circles, at least. That's the feeling I have, and we hope in the next few years that we will arrive at the destination. So, but thank you all for a very, very
Can I?
Instructive. Yes. Oh,
Yes,
you're
Can somebody hear me?
Please.
Can I speak? Hi.
Of course.
having heard, had I been a member of a jury, I would absolutely agree with the Greek side's statements or contention that the marbles were stolen. Before I hear the other side, I would possibly accept that the purchase or the theft was done without due diligence on the part of the Brits. The point is that they have them and they display them. And the question that has been discussed mostly is who owns it? Possibly, I mean, that now for me becomes more of a political issue to resolve. And possibly the ownership situation could be settled, saying that they're owned by the Greeks, but they're displayed by the Brits. And if that is settled, then we need to settle the next point, which will become a bit more easy, and that would be who has the right to display it and how could we share the display, possibly. Calm things down, let the conflict of the ownership be removed and focus on reuniting the marbles for all the reasons that you people mentioned, but I will mention a funny reason, that is that you can't go to a play or to a game and move to a different venue to see the second half. You have to see it all together. So I'm saying that one step at a time. I'm convinced the jury, I vote for Greek ownership display. There is a question because the other side did not do due diligence. However, it's a fait accompli that also needs to be settled. Split it in two, ownership and display. That's my 2 cents worth from Athens, Greece.
And Irini, can you have a comment to this?
I wanted to say that having participated with Elena in many negotiations, I want to say that there are some red lines. And one of these red lines is that we do not discuss ownership during the negotiations. And if there's going to be a settlement or an agreement, this agreement won't mention the issue of ownership. In fact, this was very difficult because the British for many years were saying that you first acknowledge our ownership and then we'll see where we go from there. And of course, Greece was against that. It never acknowledged British ownership, as you may imagine. And we said that if there is a goodwill to find a solution, this doesn't have to go through ownership. We can find a solution and we do not need to refer to ownership, because what we really want is permanent exhibition of the marbles in Athens. This is what we want. We don't have to discuss ownership. We don't need to discuss ownership, even from a legal point of view. Of course, if Britain says that, look, I'm prepared to give you a loan. In order for you to get the loan, you need to fill in a form and send it to me, as they said several years ago, in order for me to consider that. Of course, Greece has never filled in a form, because in that way, Greece would acknowledge the ownership. So this is a thorny issue, which both sides understand that it is a thorny issue, and we leave aside, because as you very well mentioned, the British Parliament did not do due diligence. It acquired something without having proper documentation. And it acquired it first because Lord Elgin had very good connections, and secondly because Lord Elgin owed a lot of money to the British state, and in order for them not to lose it, at least they got the marbles. This is how they looked at it at that stage. It's not that they looked at the marbles and said, oh, this is something we need to acquire. This was not the case. And also the money that they gave to Elgin was half of the money that Elgin had spent in order to acquire them. So from a political point of view, At that stage, we do not discuss ownership.
Called negotiation. Cheers.
Okay. Thank you very much, Irini, for this comment, which is clear, and I think you are right. Probably we can say because all the West civilization is based on the Parthenon, we can say that finally the half of the world has right on the marbles, and they have also the right to see the marbles reunified in order to understand also what is the meaning of this culture. Do we know exactly if it is the preparation for Panathenea or if it is King Kekrops that did sacrifice someone? We really need also to take the scientific part, that not only the artistic one, that certainly you cannot cut into Mona Lisa, as you said, you cannot cut into the marbles of the Parthenon, the sculptures, and also to understand better what Phidias wanted to show by these beautiful sculptures. Do we have anybody else that wants to say something else or comment? Yes. Please.
Yes.
You have
cordial greetings to all of you. I myself, being in Bosnia and witnessing this horrific European tragedy of destruction of Bosnian heritage, I have to say a few words. Probably you know that many years ago, Ananda Kumaraswamy wrote, what does it mean when we take a part of one integral complex of art, sacred value? It lost its real meaning. Marbles now taken from Parthenon, then they cannot present what they are originally. They have meaning only within this return and integrating into complexity, into their original meaning. In my view, essentially, how to say, our new understanding of our Europeanness would be just in this great enterprise, this great project, to return, to integrate, to discover their original meaning, to reconnect it with our contemporary, how to say, being exposed to different forms, even this fragmentation in our European, how to say, great civilization and enterprise. So in my view, it is what we were discussing today, what we are hearing today, is essentially rediscovering basic core, let's say, or essence of Europeanness, integrity, to return, to integrate what we distract. And in my view, this is one of the most important examples that will affect all worlds. Distraction, taking parts, presenting them in museum, how to say, depriving this integrity, what's happened with the marbles of Parthenon. It is, how to say, millions of such cases we can find. And to see now world in its integrity just could be symbolized in this returning marbles of Parthenon, integrating them in this integrity and to rediscovering their original meaning. Their meaning in British Museum or anywhere else was lost. It is simply, how to say, precious for museum, but it cannot present what they were originally in the integrity of Parthenon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You want to say any comments?
I profoundly agree. I profoundly agree.
We agree absolutely with you, and we thank you very much for this support. We have almost 2 minutes in order to finish our session, so I would like to thank everybody that helped the organization of this manifestation. And I would like also to help some persons that were not present in this discussion. It is Aris Konstantinis, who offered the beautiful flyer invitation and program. And we had here with us Leonidas Lambis, who was the one that helped us for all the technical problems. And also, last but not least, it is my wife who has worked very, very hard in order to find days to keep the whole team together in our small apartment in Athens, because we are living in Switzerland. So I thank all these people. I thank also the European Academy of Science and Arts, the supporters that we heard their messages at the beginning, and mainly also the Vice President, Professor Liritzis, Ioannis Liritzis, who organized and make possible this idea, and also Professor Tassos Bundis from Patras, that although he is a mathematician, he was initiated in the history of the Parthenon very, very rapidly, and as I see, he is very enthusiastic to help this movement. So thank all of you, and hope to see you in the second round that, according to the program, will be, I think, 18 of February. So I leave our Ioannis Liritzis to say the final closing words.
Thank you for this. I thank you from my heart, the distinguished speakers, your moderator, the supporters, and all the participants. Without their presence, we could not have this lively and interesting discussion and meeting tonight. And I'm looking forward to see you on the next one, which is on looting of antiquities and archaeological sites, by distinguished research emerita director of Center of Art and Museum and Heritage Law of DePaul University from America. It is Patty Gerstenblitt. I think she was with us tonight. And hope to see you next time. Until then, be well and take care. Thank you. Good night.